Today on 5 Great Moments, I'd like to discuss The Black Sheep of the Corman Poe cycle, The Haunted Palace from 1963, directed by Roger Corman and starring Vincent Price. I say The Black Sheep because it only owes the title to Poe. It's worth noting that Corman actually didn't want to use the Poe name at all, and it was the studio that insisted a title more suggesting continuity with his other Poe adaptations. Nevertheless, it is more so based on the Lovecraft story The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. Andrew Wyatt of Gateway Cinephile referred to it as a carelessly loose adaptation of Lovecraft's original vision, which I think is a completely apt statement. Although I would say it's not filmed in a careless manner, as it has excellent cinematography, and you can really tell while viewing it that it was all hands on deck and everyone's given it their all. Not to say it's without any of its own flaws, but as a typical 60s horror film, it certainly hits a lot of the high points. But in its own way, it is far from being a typical horror film of its era, mostly due to it being a Lovecraftian adaptation, which would, from my research, make it the first of its kind. Again, it's a very loose adaptation of the story, keeping basically the names and the core concepts, but then using that as a jumping off point to craft their own story. A reimagining, if you will. This is really a common trend with Lovecraftian adaptations, so if you want to experience the man's stories, still the only true way to do so is by reading or a good audiobook. The plot revolves around a creepy small town known as Arkham, where a necromancer named Joseph Corman has been using black magic to lure local girls to his estate, so that he can breed them with a nameless, unknowable thing in the basement. The locals find out and burn him alive, but before his death, he places a curse on the town.
As surely as the village of Arkham has risen up against me, so shall I rise from the dead against the village of Arkham. Each one of you, Ezra Whedon, Micah Smith, Benjamin West, Priam Willett, Gideon Leach, all of you and your children's children shall have just cause to regret the actions of this night. For from this night onward, you shall bear my curse.
Then, 110 years later, his descendant, who happens to look exactly like Kerwin, comes to inherit his estate. The locals have been living with birth defects, Silent Hill-style fog, and paranoia since the night of the burning, and are naturally frightened of Charles Dexter Ward. When at his ancestral estate, Charles becomes possessed by his forefather when viewing his painting, leading to weird behavior and local tragedies. Also, I think it's important to note that The Case of Charles Dexter Ward is not necessarily the best reflection of Lovecraft's style or worldview. Of course, his dizzying use of descriptive words and fanciful descriptions are all in full effect, as his love for living settings and history. But just in general, black magic and necromancy aren't usually what we think of when we think of Lovecraft's work. At least for me, HPL is more scientific and usually delves less into magic, which I believe is more about imposing our will on the natural world. Where in his fiction, humans have very little control over our own destiny, and even less knowledge about our general place in the universe, let alone how to subjugate it to our own whims. The evil have a great interest in amassing knowledge and thus power, but often it leads only to madness or death. This leads in nicely to what I consider to be a great moment in the film, if not a bit of a small betrayal of the character of Joseph Kerwin from the novella. The movie makes it seem as if Joseph is merely a pawn to the Dark Ones, in this chilling scene where they ask him about the necromancer's motivations.
See, we began a project a few years ago, but unfortunately it was interrupted, and we're most anxious to take it up again. As a matter of fact, we don't fully understand ourselves. We obey.
Even as a man whose powers give him control over life and death, these primal forces we as humans have long wished to be able to control, even he is left stupefied when faced with the black sea of infinity that surrounds him. Even he is left wonderstruck at the Elder God's true machinations. This ties nicely into Lovecraft's belief that man was but a pebble in a large rock quarry, an unremarkable and crumbling pebble. Joseph Kerwin looked to elevate himself above his fellow men via the use of black magic, but was but a pawn in a larger game he couldn't comprehend. There's an interesting duality there, and I'm curious about more academic thoughts on the topic. But when it comes to my second great moment, my mind is stuck on Price's always excellent performance. You could always tell that he loved playing a great villain, but had the range to play any character they gave him. So he must have been particularly delighted playing two roles in one. The good-natured husband in Charles Dexter Ward, and the sadistic Joseph Curwen, two minds struggling over one body. But nowhere in the film does he get to show his sinister swagger more than when he assaults Peter Smith with a container of kerosene on the street, before smoothly lighting a match and tossing it at him. The villain revels for a short moment in his revenge, and Price's performance here is just bubbling with cool confidence. You see his ruthlessness and callous nature, and how Curwen treats his loved one. His long-dead mistress named Hester is my example here. When he has Charles Dexter Ward's body in a trance, Curwen, joined by two other warlocks, Simon and Jabez, they dig up her coffin and take it to the secret basement, where they attempt to utilize their necromantic abilities to bring her back. Each time we hear her scream, and again return to the cold embrace of the crypt. Each time, Curwen urges and pushes his men not to give up. No matter how much she has to suffer to return to the world of the living, he will have his possession back. This type of cold attachment shows that even when he loves, it's a selfish, uncaring love. When Ward is informed by the scholarly Dr. Willett of his forefathers' alchemical researches and of a particular book that he employed, a book labeled the Necromonicon. In this scene, we hear him name drop Cthulhu and Yog-Sothoth, as well as giving him a basic rundown of what their existence means for mankind.
I thought, Mr. Ward, that he had gained possession of a book called the Necronomicon. Cthulhu, Yog-Sothoth. Dreadful rubbish, I know.
Charles Ward gives a reaction befitting their legendary status, and the whole scene has a feeling of reverence and heavy doom to it, befitting for a conversation about the Elder Gods. This was cinema's first mention of Cthulhu, and he creeps in with not a scream, but hushed whispers in a scene that has stuck with me since originally viewing it. This brings us to our final moment, the last scene in the film. I persuade you not to keep watching if you have yet to experience it for yourself, so go forward at your own discretion. Of spoilers for a 50-year-old movie. Ward's body has been completely taken over by Curwen at this point, and the townsfolk have had enough of the revenge killings. They take action, rushing into the shunned property, burning the house, and with it, the cursed painting. Charles lets out a cry and collapses against the tree. The audience are led to assume the evil Curwen has been banished with the destruction of his cursed image. Then we hear his voice and we know that Curwen lives.
Never repay you for what you've done, Dr. Willett.
He turns, and in a delicious moment, Price's eyes meet with the camera before uttering the movie's final line, a delightfully macabre ending. Then, we're treated to Price's soothing reading of the final lines of Poe's Haunted Palace.
While like a ghastly rapid river, through the pale door a hideous throng rush out forever and laugh, but smile no more.
I don't care if it really has anything to do with the plot of the movie at this point. I could listen to him read Poe all day. Personally, I think Carter was trapped in the burned painting, and we heard his death rattle. But what did you think? And what's your favorite on-screen depiction of the Necromonicon? Let me know in the comments, and don't be afraid to leave a like.